bids that's in the gall when updates occur to industry documents that have not been NRC reviewed and approved. So I just wondered if that process would work.
Yeah, that's so it's really in the operating area now, because once Chris renews the license, now it comes over operating. So it's an operating issue, not a license renewal issue. Yeah, I think the general response is, well, you need to follow your commitment process if it's a commitment versus a licensing requirement. So we need to look at really where that fits. And again, I would say from the first standpoint, as part of a commitment, you have to evaluate, as you said, follow the guidance on commitments, and then we still get notified. And I would say that if people are looking for certainty, there is, let's have the first plan come in and send a letter and say, I plan to make this commitment change. You're going to be getting a letter soon, NRC. I just want to make sure up front that this is not going to put me in a bad place, and then we can provide to you formally in writing on that specific plan what the position is. Because, again, when we start to look at the legal ramifications of this, doing it in generalities is sometimes tough. If we can get it in a plan specific and helping setting the precedent for moving forward, it might be better to do it on a one plan.
And I appreciate that, John. All I'm trying to figure out is how many different options we might have, because I know we've had conversations in the past. The NRC would love for the plants to use the latest information that incorporates OE and everything else that provides the margin to safety. So given the regulatory constraints, the different ones we find ourselves in, what are the multiple processes we might use to be able to do that?
Yeah, and the interesting part of that is that, this goes without being said, but I'm going to say it anyway, is, if it's a document that, as an example, requires inspections to be done every 5 years, and the OE says, well, we've revised this now, and we really ought to be doing this every 3 years. Well, there's no prohibition against you doing it every 3 years. You know that. You can go above and beyond what your requirements are. So when I start to hear things about the OE from the standpoint of making it safer, you can do that without coming in. I think where the concern comes is what I'm going to call an alternate method that you believe is safer. And whether it's, and that's maybe the type of inspection and changing the frequency to say, well, now I'm just doing things a different way, but I think it is safe based on the operating experience. But the NRC hasn't looked at that to say whether they agree or disagree with where you are. That's where the concern comes, and that may make it into a new VIP document or industry document that we haven't looked at yet. And, and that may be where the concern comes, and that's where I would say, from a legal standpoint, we need to look at first the legal aspect of it. Then if it's really just the review standpoint, we'll look at it during the review.
Yeah, why don't we do this? Because I think this issue is broader than just, our materials world. I think what I'll do is I'll take the action to get NEI engaged, and that way we can get the right legal reviews, etc., because I think this probably expends, this is a bigger issue than just the materials world. And so I think it would behoove us to, get kind of more of a core group in NEI with all the right folks, and then get agreement with NRC on, how do we make changes to these industry documents, what's the right process.
A related but a little different area, and as you're talking with the folks at NEI, Scott, you may want to pulse this issue, is this has really come up in the codes with respect to fuels, and our Division of Safety Systems has been dealing with this, where they may review a methodology, do a code validation, and issue a topical report, and the technology changes so quickly that only one or two people use that version of the topical report, and then they want to start making changes. And people have referred to that as a number of different things, such as like a 50-59 process for topical reports, which would allow vendors to make their own changes to the reports. And I've never really liked that terminology, but kind of putting it out there that that's where when you talk about it comes up. Division of Engineering is involved in that a little bit too, because we're looking at it on the digital INC side. Again, same thing there, where we're approving some digital INC platforms, and people are saying, well, by the time you finish approving it, we put it in place. You've agreed to Rev 1, and we're on Rev 6 by the time we get there. And what can we do without coming to NRC for evaluation? And that's the other part. I don't think you guys are looking a lot of our evaluations, but
Hey there.
Wanted to let you know. I'm sorry, is someone on the phone? Okay.
That's good input, John. I captured that, and you're right. It's broader, so it's probably a good NEI topic, and I'll get NEI engaged, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, just wanted to. Yeah, appreciate it. As I said at the beginning, we didn't have a lot of time for our talk right now because we think a lot of the issues are items you guys addressed along the way. A couple things just wanted to, so we're kind of going down our list of some of the topics and checked off things we've talked about already. A couple areas I just wanted to bring up and see where the industry is right now, and if there's any insights. Let's start with probably on the quasi-laminar indications that we've seen over in Europe, Dole, right now, and we've seen the latest on where they are, and they're looking for some independent technical review before making their final regulatory decision. We haven't had any change in our position at this point. We're continuing to follow, but we wanted to see if there was any activities that the industry is doing that you may have new information different than we have.
Yeah, at this point, no new information, and what we are continuing to do also, and I think NRC probably has a little more inside information because you're able to get the information from their regulator, but as soon as they are able to publish all of the technical work that they've done, we will go back through, evaluate all the technical information coming out of, unfortunately now the third plant, but all three plants, and see if there's any change in, the technical information that we previously put together, as well as, all of the records inspections that we did to go back and make sure that we didn't have this issue in the U.S.
Great, thanks. Appreciate that, and we're looking forward to seeing where the regulators come out in Belgium as well on that, and continuing to work with them. And as you said, we, in some ways we do have information that we can share between governments, but then there's also, I know there's been some meetings that have occurred, closed meetings, that people have signed some confidentiality agreements and going to those meetings. I know you've had some industry folks there that can't share what they've specifically discussed, but you could share that if there was actions you needed to take based on that. And what I'm hearing is that you didn't hear anything that required any different actions than we're aware of.
That's correct.
Right, okay. Another topic we're continuing to follow right now, but we're not seeing immediate action on, is with respect to the reactor vessel heads in France, where they had some inconsistencies, I guess, not homogeneity among the heads, and they were looking at that. We're still following those findings. Wanted to see if you had any insights, either with respect to what's going on in France right now, or with respect to anything in the U.S. industry.
Yeah, our understanding of that at this point is that it was a problem, obviously, in the way they fabricated the vessel, and are not seeing any ties in the U.S. at this point, but we'll continue to follow that one also.
Right. Yeah, we're in the same there. Okay. I'm going to ask Bob maybe to speak for a minute or two on where we are on Appendix H. We're looking at rulemaking with respect to Appendix H.
Yeah, we're doing rulemaking proceeding on Appendix H. The most significant change will be the change in ASTM standard, the addition that's referenced. We're going to move ahead 35 years and reference a more modern document, and then adjust the time frame for reporting here to a larger number of. Yeah, we cover both. And the target is to have a draft regulatory basis issued for public comment next spring.
So since we're looking at the regulatory basis right now, we really can't talk too much more detail than that, but I wanted Bob to at least give you the overall scope of what you would expect to see next spring, and then we'll look for your comments, and if necessary, have a public meeting to discuss those.
That's good. We appreciate the heads up.
One of the areas we wanted to express appreciation is the human factors for NDE. We're working I guess, through our Office of Research on our Brian. You wanted to add anything to that right now, but yeah, we're modifying our MOU to help facilitate some more information sharing on that, and but we appreciate the industry efforts in that area. Brian, did you want to add?
And as we talked about earlier, we'll we stay pretty locked in with the NDE community, and we'll get another update from them in a few weeks at the Nuclear Power Council meetings and how all of that's progressing. But all the information we have is that it's been progressing well, and the industry's making good progress. The one thing that I didn't note up front, there was a little bit of it in one of David's slides, but we engage IMPO very, very heavily in the materials programs, and IMPO actually goes out to each one of our utilities and inspects the material programs, or evaluates, I should say, the materials programs periodically, just to make sure that everybody's staying aligned with the requirements. And one of the big ones they've been checking lately is on NDE, since we had a few misfires, in the NDE world. So it's also getting some good oversight from IMPO.
Good. Just two more items I wanted to bring up, and I'm going to turn to Chris and Brian, see if they had something they wanted to discuss. The relief request, we're looking at putting out some type of generic communication here shortly on relief request. I think IN, risk, could be branch technical position. The whole idea of this is we think this is a benefit from the standpoint is really trying to share lessons learned of where we had a lot of REIs come in the past and reliefs. So we're trying to put some additional guidance out on the street so that people can learn from the previous request and we can streamline things more. We're seeing a lot of the same types of issues come in, and we're issuing a lot of the same types of REIs. So I don't want you guys to be blindsided by this, that we think there's a major problem. It's not a major problem from a safety standpoint, but from an efficiency standpoint of being able to review those reliefs and use our resources and your resources more effectively, we'll be putting that document out. So it's really a guidance document more than anything. We talked about, I said there were two items, I lied, there's three. You talked about the probabilistic fracture mechanics as being an item, and we do need to look at that more, and I do think right now, having this meeting on peening and how do we look at it there is really going to be the first step. But I want to let you know that we are considering going further than that, but we want to use that as first step here to look at it. And do we need to put out additional guidance on using probabilistic fracture mechanics? How would we use it? What areas? Where we would use it and going forward. So we've kind of have that as I'll say a little bit of an open item / action item on our part to keep in the back of our minds as we move forward, but let's address the more immediate issue first.
Yeah, and that'll tie in with some discussions we've been having in the industry lately on what are the big frontiers for us as we move forward as an industry, to engage NRC on, and the big one is being risk informed. And obviously this touches on risk informed because it's probabilistic, and I think there are some opportunities to get more risk informed in some of the materials issues as we've discussed previously.
Yes, without a doubt. Our office director, Bill Dean, as you know, just came in last October as our office director. October, December, maybe it's December, last fall. And so when Bill came in, that was one of his big things, is really looking at trying to use risk information and being more risk informed. Yeah, I think no one in the room would deny that we have used risk information, as we've done a lot of things up till now. But continuing to use it more is something we need to look towards. Bill's looked at that from the standpoint of operability, And we're talking about operability. How do you look at the risk involved with operability? My terminology I like to use better is how do you look at our reaction using risk when you're dealing with operability issues, because you may not be able to, operability may not be something you can really say it's risk informed, but the reaction, meaning the actions the plant has to take and the actions NRC takes, might be different based on the risk involved in that operability issue. So I think that's an area we'll look. How do we do that with risk-informed ISI? How do we expand out the use of, expanding the use of risk-informed ISI? How do we look at it in other areas as well? And we need to look at that more generically. And we don't want to go into it too expeditiously from the standpoint of making sure that we're setting the right precedent as we move forward. But it is on all of our radar as we move forward.
Good, thanks.
So the last item I will bring up is ASME code, and we've been a big player in the ASME code, and we will continue to be. But I think you're going to see changes as we move forward in the way we interact with the code. Number one is in our rulemaking. We're really looking to continue to make lessons learned and process improvements in how do we incorporate the ASME code into our regulations. Our participation in code, we send a lot of people to code meetings as the industry does, 4 times a year. What you're going to see as we continue to go forward is you probably won't see as many NRC folks at the code meetings. It doesn't mean it's not important. What we're trying to do is really look at what's the most effective and efficient way to interact with the code. You may, if you're on a code committee or task group, whatever it may be, does it really necessitate that you need to go to all 4 meetings, or can you do it more efficiently by video conferencing, teleconferences, doing work outside the code meetings, and providing information? So we're looking aggressively at that right now. Brian Thomas is our code exec and standards exec. Thank you, standards exec. And but we're looking at it even more locally now as we start to go through looking at travel and where we are. It doesn't mean in any way we don't value the code. That is something we definitely value, and we will continue to do that and think it is a great vehicle. It's a great resource and a great asset for safety. But it's really looking at the efficiency in doing that. So you'll see some changes there. Another change you're going to see, and Brian and myself and other folks have communicated on this recently, is getting more involved in code interpretations and inquiries. We've mentioned a couple times today during this meeting where there's been some different views either from the industry with the code, and the code has come back and said, no, we agree with where NRC's interpretation is. There's been others where the NRC has not agreed with the ASME interpretation. So we're trying to be more proactive in being involved in those inquiries so that we can make sure that when the positions are put out, no one is blindsided later. I know one of the things we also appreciate about the code is they would like to hear the NRC input early so that it is put into the code and does not become a condition later. And we appreciate that. So we want to make sure on our part that we're providing that information early so that they can get that input. May not always agree, but at least they can have adequate consideration in going forward. And we think inquiries is an area where we do want to make sure that we're providing our input early so that the code understands our position before it moves forward. Again, it's going to be their final decision on the code, but from a regulatory requirement, if it's incorporated into the NRC requirements, it's our final interpretation of 5055A. So that was what I had. Chris?
Thank you, John. This is my first one of these meetings. I met with a number of you all in other forums, specifically license renewal-related ones. But I do appreciate quite extensive material and the preparation that you all had to go through to do that. It was very useful, and I appreciate that, the material and the preparation. Just a couple of notes. A lot of my issues have been checked off. So, status of the letters of intent for a subsequent license renewal or second license renewal. We heard a little bit about this earlier. I just wanted to paint the framework that we're in. Of course, we're being scrutinized in Congress as far as our budget and our budget proposals are being kicked about and looked at, and of course we're on a downward trend of funding and staffing. But as we look beyond, we haven't had to put anything together for 2018 yet, but as we look to put our budget together for 2018, we look at, very few new submittals coming in, wrapping up the old submittals for the first round of license renewal, and then we have to plan for what's happening with subsequent license renewals. So that becomes a big factor for us. We have to look at the resources necessary. Where do we put those resources? Do we keep it in a division within NRR, or do we spread it out amongst the other divisions of NRR? Those kinds of looks are taking place at this point. So, again, the sooner we get that kind of information, the better. And I realize there's restrictions, and we've talked about it both in this forum and outside this forum of the reasons for it. But just a kind of a pride that the sooner we get that kind of information, then the better we can make our planning as we're moving forward. So, appreciate your help in that. The resolution of technical issues, specifically research needed. Your slide 9 talked about that, and you talked about a meeting in the fall, getting together to discuss those. We found the meetings that we've had with EPRI, DOE, and NRC very valuable. I know we're looking at some deep dives, as we call them, to get more into the details, because what we found out is, when you talk from a high level, you think, okay, well, that issue's being addressed, that issue's being addressed, this one's not, we need to focus more on that one. But as you talk more details, you find out that maybe it's not quite the picture you thought you had before. So from that standpoint, I want to just thank the folks for getting together. These meetings have been, I think, extremely valuable to us. But as you're sharing your information in the fall, and we're talking about ours, we just want to keep those efforts going. And I think we have that forum. We don't need an action item. I think the deep dive meetings that we're setting up will accommodate that. So I appreciate your efforts on that. Really, that's pretty much it, except to say that, for the first applications for SLR, it is going to be challenging for the individual utilities that put those applications forward if we don't get some of those key technical issues resolved. So we look forward to the document that you're talking about the 37 changes and where those are and how we'll get those incorporated, because that will make it easier for the applicants for SLR to refer to current documents, and it'll allow us to review those as well. But also, I think, we just need to make sure that in these subsequent meetings that we're having on the research, et cetera, that we do focus on the right issues so that, the burden won't be as heavy for the initial applicants for SLR. So, again, I think we're working in the right direction. I want to thank you for that, but just wanted to highlight those areas.
Give me the opportunity to say something. I just take advantage of it. Very briefly, I just want to second some of the comments made by John and as well as by Chris, specifically with regard to the codes and standards area, where we're looking at basically enhancing our whole program in the codes and standards arena, and it's primarily driven so that we get more efficiency and more effectiveness out of the program. So I second all of the comments that John said. In terms of SLR, I do want to, I second what Chris said. I do want to thank you a lot for, the increased efforts. We've had a lot of collaboration, a lot of forthcoming on and looking a little deeper at the technical issues that are involved, trying to identify gaps, trying to identify, what's needed in terms of our our interactions to identify these issues, identify the gaps, identify potential resolution to the issues, all with the targeted time frame in mind of 2018, 2019, when we expect the submittal. So for all of that, I want to say thank you. It's been a good effort so far. Thanks.
Lastly, Bob, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Thank you very much for the meeting. It's very, very useful from my perspective. New Reactors doesn't generally get involved at these, I understand, but I think we're going to maintain involvement from here on out. Thank you.
Thanks, appreciate it. Before we continue on the agenda, as I said earlier, we do want to give an opportunity for members of the public that are on the phone to ask any questions or any comments. Let's start, Joe. I think you took a poll earlier at the beginning of the meeting. We did have one member of the public, Ms. Gray, on the line, and if there's others, we'll ask them to chime in, but we'll give Ms. Gray the first opportunity. Ms. Gray, are you still there, and did you have any questions or comments for the NRC?
Well, thank you. This is Erica Gray in Virginia. Obviously, I'm going to look through the slideshow a little bit better. I had problems on the computer kind of following through. I think one of my biggest concerns is the leak before break kind of procedure that the NRC and industry uses. Of course, in my opinion, it would be better to fix before break. But besides that, I don't have any other questions.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. Bob Hardees is our NRC contact for the technical issues. So if you look through the slides and have any additional questions or comments regarding technical issues, Bob will be your first point of contact. If there's anything administrative, you can get with Joe Gola, the project manager. Is there any other members of the public on the phone line? Okay, hearing none, if I could, I think Joe may have mentioned this at the beginning of the meeting. We do have public feedback forms for the public meetings. If you have an interest, you can fill those out. They can be on the content of the meeting, structure, administrative. There were questions, I think, at the beginning of this meeting about the phone lines and some of the concerns hearing. That is also the kind of feedback we're looking for. Those forms are available on our website, and you can either fill them out online or print the document and mail it to us. I believe there's a self-mailer on that as well. Joe, is there anything I missed before we go to the...
No, I think...
Okay, so Joe's telling me I missed nothing, so that's good. Okay, so let me turn to Bob and Robin to talk about where we are as any additional action items or close out of action items, and then we'll have some closing remarks.
Well, I'm going to go first with the action items that we had to open from before. One was to ensure the best use of resources. Industry and NRC will explore developing a process to assess priorities. We did talk about that today, but I'm just going to leave it open because there's more work to do on it. The second one that remains open that I want to talk about is
on the prioritization tool. I guess from my perspective, I know you and Robin, came together and put together the prioritization tool. And what we're going to do from the industry standpoint is get our programs to continue to use that tool to screen things that come in. And I asked them to also go back and screen what we're currently working on. And, based on our use of the tool, then we'll engage NRC if we see things that we think has a lower priority and that we really ought to not be currently working on, or it ought to be worked on in the future versus some of the more higher priority items. So we'll just make sure to use that tool and engage with NRC as we see a need.
Appreciate that. We've also, we're doing the same thing internally. So that if we see something coming in and it doesn't seem to be captured correctly on what the scope would be, or I've asked our branch chiefs and our technical reviewers to look at that and ask the same kind of questions. And if it doesn't seem aligned, engage back with the submitter to make sure that we're aligned.
Good. based on you both saying you're gonna use the tool, do I carry the action item?
I'm not sure we need to continue to carry the action item. I think we can continue to use the tool and then in future meetings talk about, any issues that may come out of use of the tool.
All right, I'm gonna reflect that one as closed.